Hi everyone, this is Beginner Music Theory. We're going to be covering some extra topics of Lesson 5 in Noteflight. So in Lesson 5 of musictheory.net, we talked about dots and ties. And the first thing I wanted to mention, and the reason why we're here in Noteflight, is that I wanted to show you guys how dots are also applicable to rests. So in our lesson, we saw how dots work with note durations, but we didn't talk about rest durations and how dots affect it. So dots are exactly the same for rests. They add half of the value to the rest, and they can be used exactly the same. So let's just make an example here. So I'm going to go to this bar, and I'm just going to split up this whole note rest into, let's say, 2 half note rests. So we now have a half note rest that's equal to 2 beats, 2 quarter notes, but it's a rest, so it's silent. And now we're gonna go over here. We have that selected. We're gonna go to the dot over here, and we're gonna click that. So watch what's gonna happen. So now we have 1 half note rest on the left, and then we have a second one on the right. So that adds up to 4 quarter notes, 4 beats total. If we take that first one and we make it a dotted half note rest, we now have a half note or a half rest plus half of that, which is a quarter rest. And that equals 3 quarter rests, and then finally 1 last quarter rest here. So this adds up to 3 quarter rests total. 4 quarter rests total. 3 in the dotted half plus 1 last one here. So you see, it's exactly the same thing as a dotted half note. A dotted half note would have been 3 quarter notes plus 1 final quarter note. And I can even go ahead and write it here just so you guys see that they are the same. I'm going to make that first note a half note with the dot. And then as you can see, we still have 1 final quarter note rest here, and I can just write a quarter note there. So the top staff in rests is exactly the same, equivalent in time to the bottom stuff that has no durations instead of rests. Okay, so very important thing to, and the same thing applies to other values. If we split up this into quarter notes, let's just put 4 quarter note rests, right? So if we now made this quarter note rest a quarter dotted rest, a dotted quarter rest, you're going to see that this second quarter rest is going to turn into an 8th rest. So I'm going to click the dot, and now we have a dotted quarter rest, which is 3 8th rests, or a quarter plus an 8th rest. And then finally, 1 more 8th note here makes up the 2 quarter notes and the two quarter rests, or the 2 quarter beats. Okay, this, what we have up here, is the same as writing the following. Let's make that an 8th note. This down here in this bottom staff is equivalent to what's above in terms of note durations, and this is rest durations and note durations. So it's exactly the same. So I just want you guys to see how the concept of dots applies to rest as well. All right, so aside from that, I want to also talk about the idea of double dotting. So just like we can add 1 single dot to a note value, we can add 2 dots. And what that does is, in the first dot, we are adding half of the value of the base note. And if we add a second dot, what that second dot does is add half of the half that we already added before. So gets a little bit tricky and a little bit confusing, but it's actually not that complicated. So let's just give you an example here. We have a dotted half note, which is a half note plus a quarter note. Remember, the quarter is half of an eighth note. That's a single dot. Now, if we add a double dot to the half note, we're gonna have the half note and then a quarter note, which is half of the base value, and then the second dot is going to add half of a quarter note, which is an eighth note. So we're gonna end up with a total of a half note, a quarter note, and an eighth note. So look at what happens when we add a double dot here. You're gonna see that this final value of the measure is gonna turn into an eighth note. So you see, it turned into an eighth rest instead of an eighth note, but it's exactly the same idea. So now here we have a half note plus a quarter note, or like 3 quarter notes, and then half of a quarter note, which is an eighth note. So the last bit to complete the measure is another eighth note, and then we have a full bar here. Okay, so this up here is the same thing as writing. Let me see if I can do it with ties. I'm going to write, I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to write a half note first, no dot, and then I'm going to write in the next place a quarter note, and then finally I'm going to add, and actually I want to tie incoming ties. Oh, I see. Let's do this. That's what I was trying to do. Sorry. So we have that, and now in this final beat, I'm going to write an eighth note, and I'm going to tie that as well. So remember that the tie is adding the note values. But I did it this way so that you can see it very clearly. So we have a half note, add a quarter note, which is half of the half note, and then finally half of the quarter note, which is an eighth note. That's the double dot. So the first dot would be this, and the second dot would be that. And as you can see, this up here is exactly equivalent in terms of time to what's underneath. And you know that also because the final rest value is the same, is an eighth note rest. And that's what we need to complete the 4/4 bar. So the concept of double dotting is very simple. So you just need a little bit of practice with it. Let's do one final one with double dotted quarter note. So if we turn the double dotted quarter note, if we turn this dotted quarter into a double dotted, what's going to happen here is that eighth note turn into a 16th note, because now part of that eighth note, which is 2 16th notes, one of those 16th notes actually went into this value, and we are left with that. This dotted quarter, double dotted quarter, is the same as writing this quarter note without dot, and then I wanted to move to the next beat, and now here we write an eighth note. That's half of a quarter note. And now we write half of an eighth note, which is a 16th note. Let's bring it down. And then we're going to turn that into a 16th note. So, and then now we tie this whole thing. And And you remember that the tie works when the notes are the same pitch. So now we have quarter note plus half, which is an eighth note, plus half of that, which is a 16th note. That all equals to a double dotted quarter note. So you see base value plus half of that. Okay, so a little bit confusing at first, but if you try it out a bunch of times, you'll see that it's actually pretty easy and it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, in this additional lesson, we covered how dots affect rests as well as note durations. We also talked about double dotting, which is adding yet another half value to a single dotted note. So just review this and do some further exercises and you'll get the hang of it very quickly. All right, see you guys later.